I've had lots of trips where the walleyes kind of give you the middle fin.
One of my favorite techniques, it's not a favorite technique, it's when you have to do it, you use it, which is simply taking a spoon, and you're not using the spoon for its action or profile or color or anything like that. You're just back hooking a minnow and dropping that spoon on the bottom, and if it's a silty bottom or sand bottom, and you're just letting that minnow sit and kick all the way around that spoon. And a lot of times when those walleyes are coming in and going out like you're describing, if you pin that minnow down and their belly is up and they're wildly freaking out because they can't move, I've watched them on a camera where you're downviewing and they just sit there and they stare at it, and you can see them positioning to hit it, and then they just whap it. So that is the worst day of fishing. That's what I will do. Another thing that works is just a plain hook, a split shot right down on the hook eye, and doing the same thing right on the bottom.
Two things. The first and the easy answer is that always employ a dead stick approach nearby. You can't even believe how often people don't even notice what they're doing. They're so busy jigging and they're so in love with their jigging stroke, they won't keep that bait moving. And as the fish are approaching, sometimes they're dropping the bait in the fish's face, and that's a no-no because no predator is used to a minnow racing into its mouth, right? So often the walleyes come into that. If there's a little free swimming minnow off to the side on a dead stick, they'll come over and hit that, and that's lights out. So that's the easy button. I'd say the deep dive answer is if you don't have a dead stick approach and you keep working on these fish, consider each time it comes up to you as a set, as a rep, and you want to show them something different on every rep. The one thing you keep the same is you keep the bait well above them. Give them room to make the move to close to you. When you start dropping at their level in their face, those fish that are finicky just don't tolerate it. You want them to make the move to you, but then for every rep, for every set, you show them something different. Bigger, higher lifts, rocking the bait, quick flickers. Another set, they'll come in, drop it to the bottom, pound the bottom. You want to see what's triggering fish, because when you can figure that out, then you can start applying it to the next finicky fish and you start to see patterns. That's how you catch more fish.
You know, I get more aggressive. I don't let them come up and look at it. You know, I rip it away from them, and you know, and then they come in on, rip it away from them again. Pretty soon they'll come in and hit it that hard enough that you can't get it away from them. But to let them come up and examine it is I think one of the worst things you can do. You know, I'm not a dead sticker. In other words, I got to give it action.
So when you talk about negative walleyes, I believe there are two things that work to catch them. One is targeting them at night. You know, at times when they won't bite during the day, sometimes I believe there is a period where they will bite at night. Whether it's with a sucker, a big live bait, or what have you. The other thing I'm a firm believer is that there are reaction baits that will get fish to come and either look or want to strike a bait. And for me, the best reaction bait that I can get walleyes to come in on are definitely a blade style bait. You know, I use a small blade bait that rips and makes a ton of vibration in the water. And you rip it and you rip it, and it calls the fish in because they can hear it with their lateral line. And when they come in, I'll have them chase it. Now, usually when they're negative, they just will come in and look at it, but they don't want to eat it. And one of the things that I found is if I have a follow-up bait right next to me, a small jig, a small tungsten jig, and a little tiny plastic, or a little sort of finessed minnow bait, whether you're trying to have a straight, you know, red tail or a little minnow tail, and I fire that tungsten right back down to them, and I just pull it and move it, and I've had them fish just come up and want to eat that finesse bait, and you can call them in with that blade bait. So for me, on the most negative times, I have found that the blade bait will call them fish in, and you move. If there's no fish in the hole after 30 seconds, a minute, you move. You go to the bottom, you rip, the fish comes in right away, you try to pull the bait away from them if they're gonna hit it. If they don't, you reel it up real quick, you drop down that, and then you try to get them with the finesse bait. So, you know, big perch and negative walleyes, that's one of the things I learned when I was in the Dakotas is don't be afraid to fish a blade bait or something that's really making noise, and it will call in those fish. You'd be surprised, you know, walleyes and everything, they love eating them.
Well, I've been in situations where, you know, where even I had an underwater camera down, I saw it was embarrassing how many fish just came by. And typically the fish that are really off like that, you can tell by looking at the camera that they're not going to bite. This is their fins are really tight to their body, and maybe 1 out of 20 of those fish will come by, and the back will be arched, the fins will be up, and you know as soon as you see that fish is going to eat, just by its body posture. Where the other fish they're like geese migrating in the sky. They're going from point A to point B. It doesn't matter what they see from point A to point B. They're just making their way, and it's almost like, you know, you're invisible. And so that's the challenging thing, is that you have to get in your head, is that you're playing a numbers game sometimes where maybe it's 1 out of 20, maybe it's 1 out of 30, and that's why it's a head game, is because, you know, you're trying all these different things on these fish that you're marking that won't respond or do anything, and then all of a sudden one fish just out of the blue eats it. Well, that's because I scaled down to a plain hook and a minnow. Well, then the next fish comes by and ignores that, and you're messed up in the head even more. And so I think you have to realize that it's a percentage. It's 1 out of 20, it's 1 out of 30, it's 1 out of 40, and sometimes it's an efficiency thing. You know, I've done the reaction thing as far as, you know, ripping a lure to try to cause a reaction bite. I've done that and done well, and I've used the finesse and the dead sticking and stuff and caught fish. But I think it's a mentality where you have to know it's going to be tough. And when things get tough like that, what I look at is it's an efficiency thing. It's a percentages thing where only a percentage of the fish are going to bite. And what I look at is my fish per hour. Okay, if I can average a fish an hour, and over 10 hours I have 10 fish, chances are I did better than anybody else on a really tough bite. So you just roll up your sleeves where there's fish and just try to make everything count.
Sweet.
There's been a lot of days where I didn't.
Yeah, go early and go late. I mean, in two factions. One is early ice, as long as you stay safe. One's late ice, as long as you stay safe. The fish are just a little bit more aggressive, and they seem to have more of a willingness to bite during that time frame. In the middle of winter, I think we all realize that in the month of end of January to all throughout February, they can be pretty tough to catch. And so then those light windows, especially the early morning and the late evenings, and maybe in some cases like Mille Lacs where the water gets so clear, you know, all night, get to be pretty key. The other thing that I like to do is either really throw a lot of flash at them. I put a lot of flickers, and you know, I've gone in the last few years to running double spoons. Just put a treble on one of them, use the other spoon as a clapper, and then aggressively jig it, because it makes way more noise than the rattles. It gives you twice as much flutter when they fall, and quite often they'll call the fish in from longer distance, even if they are somewhat lethargic. And then I'll always fish a dead stick real close to it, you know, just a plain jig. And often, if I'm seeing a lot of fish come in when I'm jigging, but I'm not getting quite a few, I'll go right straight to a straight jig, and I'll start fishing it like a crappie. You know, I'll go to a fat head instead of a big sucker minnow, and I'll fish it so that the fat head is fairly lively, and I won't be using any strokes. It'll all be real subtle twitches, just like you do with crappie fishing. And that, many times, you know, the jigs way outproduce anything else when the fish are lethargic.
That's cool.
Just a small 32nd or 16th ounce round ball.
You know, the biggest thing I've kind of seen over the last few years is looking at not only how a bait drops, but how it rises. What I mainly mean in that is a lot of the spoons, when you pull them up, they come straight up and maybe they flutter down, they come off to the sides. But you can actually get spoons now that as you pull them up, they might come a little to the side before they come on down. Or you can use things like a glide bait, a shiver minnow or something like that, where when you pull on it, they jump to the side. And so you got to be a little careful though with those off or neutral fish, because a lot of times that side movement will draw them in, but then they get real finicky about if you give it another hard stroke, off they go. So you got to remember always that when you're doing those hard strokes, especially with these baits that are jumping out to the side, that will draw them in, and as soon as you see them come in, that's when you really got to go a lot more subtle. Just little tiny shakes, little tiny rises, but don't hesitate to be aggressive to pull them in. Just know that if they come in and they've been turning around all morning, it's time to really slow down once they get in there. But look at that uprise as well as the down flutter. A lot of times that'll bring those fish in better.
Like I was saying earlier about using larger presentations for panfish, I tend to do that with with walleyes, sometimes they get negative on me, and I do almost the exact opposite, where I'll get really aggressive with them to try to get them interested. And yeah, you're not going to get every fish to strike, but they're not going to feed anyway. You got a live minnow down there, they're not striking it, so why not try something a little different? So, you know, using more aggressive approach, whether it's with a spoon, whether it's with a horizontal type of bait like a rip and wrap or a jigging wrap, but beating the silk, getting a little more aggressive, fishing higher in the water column, just to see if you can get a reaction out of the fish. And I do that a lot during the daytime hours, where as soon as those feeding windows start to shut down, I'll start to get aggressive. I like to move a lot more, try to get baits in front of fish's face. So that's where I think ice trolling really takes over, where you're staying on the move, just trying to go and get in front of active fish. And then fishing a little more aggressive than you may be used to. I see so many ice anglers like drop a bait down to the bottom, right? And they fish within 6 inches or a foot of the bottom. And that's kind of the whole realm they fish all winter. Whereas I'll fish 2, 3, 4 feet off the bottom because I want those aggressive fish, because I know if they come up off the bottom to hit it, they're gonna strike. They're not up there just to look around and not hit your bait. They're coming up there for the reason it's to check it out. And it's getting that kind of aggression strike.
You know, a lot of times the bottom rigs will work. You know, one of the things about AquaView is you start to see fish behaviors and little micro type behaviors that you would never see on a sonar unit. And so what I've found is on AquaView, a couple things. One, the walleyes ride a lot higher off the bottom than I always thought. I always thought they were kind of bottom cruisers, and I'm finding a lot of these fish are 12 to 18 inches off the bottom as they're moving, if they're bottom relating. But there are times when a bottom-based bait will work, and I've seen actually them pick up dead minnows that I've lost off the jig and just slide down and grab them. So, you know, when the bite's that tough, you know, I'll fish a lot slower. I'll fish a lot tighter to the bottom and let the fish move. But honestly, if it gets too tough, I'll go crappie fishing or I'll fish perch or something. It's one of those things. Walleyes, you know, I love them. I love to eat them, but there's times when it just simply isn't worth fishing them.
If you want to stay with the standard bait that you were using that got them into the hole to begin with, you can change the cadence on it. You know, so instead of a snap or something like that, you might jiggle it a little bit. You might let it sit still. You know, sometimes letting a bait stick sit still can be a triggering thing, and a lot of people don't think that. But a lot of times what I do is I have another rod sitting right next to me with a smaller version of what I was using, or a completely different bait, like between a spoon and a jig and wrap or just a jig. I'll put a minnow head on it. I might cut the minnow head differently. I just do something different. If I keep getting negativity from fish, I want to change it up for them. But I think first I change the cadence, and then after that I'll change the size of the bait, and usually, most often, that will be the deciding factor.
I'm a firm believer you can't make negative fish bite, because I watched the Lindners growing up. And you can get neutral fish and positive fish to go, but negative fish are never generally. So negative fish to me is belly to the bottom, laying there. That's a negative walleye. You can bounce it off his head. He's not gonna get too angry. But sometime when his window opens up, he's gonna come up. And but if you're saying like a tough bite, a front bite, I would say I downsize. No matter what it is, I'm downsizing. Whether it's panfish or whatever. If it's frontal fish, I'm gonna slow down and downsize and try and work it out that way. I may still stick with artificials though. I find artificials on a front is, you know, almost always gonna outfish live bait. When the fish are like coming in finicky and they're pecking at a live bait, you send down an artificial. To me, it's just like jig fishing with minnows, and they're peeling it back, they're spitting it out. So all of a sudden you wing a crankbait and you get the reaction, boom, they're hooks. It's all hooks all over their face, so they can't get off. So you're switching to an artificial, you're getting a reaction strike, even though it's still ice fishing. You know, fishing with the artificial to me is more of a reaction bite.
When I'm working a fish that doesn't seem to want to bite, the thing that I have the best luck with is playing some sort of cat and mouse game, where I'm just trying to keep pulling the bait up, and trying to get the fish to chase it. Now I can think of a really good instance years ago that Tommy Scarless and I were on the Saginaw River where it's like 14 feet of water and we're doing puppet minnows and jigging wraps, and I'm that 14 feet. We had to lift that fish all the way up to probably within 3 feet of the ice before they actually ever fully committed to biting. Now that said, if I've got a really finicky fish that doesn't want to bite, especially a walleye, simple presentations with a plain hook and a minnow is really hard to beat, especially like a set line. That is the best presentation out there for a really finicky walleye.
I've had lots of trips where the walleyes kind of give you the middle fin, and that's just a figure of speech, but there's ways you can get them to turn around. I've seen many times just switching in the tournaments. No matter how bad it is or how much everybody complains, somebody wins. When you go out on a lake, there's always a way to make them bite. I've got simple solutions. From soup to nuts, off from throw some buckshot flutter spoons down with a glow stick. If they don't want that, then I'll try the traditional buckshot. Then try metallic colors. On a clear body of water or water that has history, you'll know what they like to eat. If you go to Devil's Lake, you better have day glow perch buckshots in an 1/8 ounce or 32nd ounce size, or you could have gold. You go to Lake of the Woods, pink or gold. So there's a history of every lake, and you better arm yourself what's known to be on that lake. So when you go into your sporting goods, people know. And then if you go to that lake, of course, Red Lake, no one's catching them jigging. Everybody wants to jig. I want to jig. I get bored. I jig. Go to Winnipeg, you won't catch nothing jigging sometimes. But on Red Lake, put a fathead down on a glow shot jig and just let it sit. And you're going to get more bites. You want to jig, but sometimes you shouldn't. And if they don't bite on that, I leave. I go to another body of water. I'm not faithful to any lake, and if a walleye bite goes down here, it might be going here, because shallow waters and deep waters have different things going on at different times. From spring, summer, fall, and winter, the shallow lakes go first, then the deep lakes go, and then in the fall, when the shallow lakes get too cold, the deep lakes go. In the wintertime, it's the same. The cooling effect from fall creates good bites when other lakes are going down. So you know what? I just put my truck and drive, and I get out of there.